when you're creating a new variety, it takes on average up to 10 years, and for a conventional variety up to $1 to $2 million US to create that new variety. And then we're talking a conventional non-biotech variety. If we're talking about a biotech variety, we're looking at a manifold of those investments. So clearly, when you're making this amount of investment, you would like to have a return on those investments. And those innovators out there that are willing to make those investments, they want a decent form of protection, of intellectual property protection, to guarantee that return on investment. So there you have the protection part, and the trade-off with society is that the innovator needs to provide access. In the patent law, that access is guaranteed by the disclosure of the invention, and under plant variety protection, that access is guaranteed by the breeder's exemption. And this trade-off with society is already a recognized principle since the onset of intellectual property in the 14th century. It was already recognized back then that it should be a temporary monopoly with this specific trade-off. And of course, we've seen over the past few decades a lot of developments in the plant breeding and seed sector, leading to a shortening of the creation time of a new variety. Also, competitors could catch up more quickly with a new variety, so that triggered a discussion in ISF whether we should revise our ISF view on intellectual property. And we've had, it took us a few years with sometimes very animated discussions, but we managed to adopt a new ISF view on intellectual property at our last Congress in Rio de Janeiro with a unanimous adoption. So that's very good. And of course, the interface between patents and PVP was, of course, one of the main hot potatoes. And I'm very happy to say that we reconfirmed, in a way, the compromise position that we took already back in '99, where we're saying, okay, if you're looking at a patented variety that falls under a patent, ISF is saying you can breed with that variety, and if the resulting new variety is outside the scope of the patent, you're free to go. You can freely commercialize it. However, on the other hand, if that new variety falls under the scope of the patent, of course you need to take a license. We added in this new position some more nuts and bolts to this core opinion of the seed industry, but I think this is still the main message that we all adopted, and I think it's a very elegant and a very nice and well thought through position of the seed industry. Yes, we are, as a planet, we're faced with numerous major challenges, right? And in my view, governments really need to be as facilitating as possible for the seed trade. They need to make it as easy as possible so that seed can move around the planet to all the countries where the high quality seeds are needed, right? But what we're seeing is countries who are putting up trade barriers. Trade barriers in all kinds of fields, a lot of trade barriers in phytosanitary, in the phytosanitary field. And those trade barriers are often not based on science, but they're based on political whim. They want to please their voters, or they're based on outdated science, or they haven't read the latest peer-reviewed scientific articles, and so on and so forth. And ISF is working to overcome and to bring down those trade barriers with the help of the relevant national seed associations. We're going out there and we're trying to show to those governments that their trade barriers are not science-based, and that they really should do something about it. I'll give you two examples. Earlier this year, Brazil had implemented already a while ago, I think it was 1 or 2 years ago, the new regulation NI36, which was making it very difficult for vegetable seeds to enter the country. And ISF organized earlier this year a well-prepared mission of the seed industry to meet with Brazilian officials. And we had very good talks there. And immediately afterwards, we saw already a lightening of the mood. Brazil filed a revised version with the WTO, and we're moving on from there. And so the second example is Turkey. And we saw in January this year where a new very restrictive set of rules came into force that was making it very difficult for all seeds, not just vegetables, but for all seeds to enter Turkey. ISF met in Ankara with the officials of the Turkish Ministry of Agriculture. We've met several times. The last time was last week, in fact. And we're clearly seeing some opening up. We are seeing understanding of the position of the seed industry, and that is very hopeful that probably beginning of next year we'll see a revised version of that set of regulations. So I think that an increased debate on biotechnology, especially in Europe, is certainly positive. It means people are reading more about it, it means people are talking more about it, and it also means that the other sides of biotechnology are surfacing. We've seen, of course, in the last 10-15 years, a very unilateral view of certain media, and of course I'm talking about anti-biotech media, about the perceived disadvantages of biotechnology. And I think the more that people are talking about it, it means that all the advantages, and there are numerous advantages of biotech, are all surfacing. And a very good example is the recent Seralini case. It's a French, I would call him a pseudoscientist, who published a rather negative report on biotech. And immediately, within, I would almost say within a few hours, and in the next few days after the release of that scientific study, numerous scientists and other people have reacted with very well-funded documents and blogs and other press releases that this study was completely flawed from A to Z. So I think that is contributing to the debate in a positive way, because we're seeing more information becoming available. And of course the polls where people are being surveyed about their opinion on biotechnology is showing an increase in the positive attitude of the general audience about biotechnology. Yes, I think it's important that we put all the facts on the scale, that we're showing with numerous facts that there are still people dying of hunger and malnutrition. Every 3.5 seconds, a person in this world is dying of hunger and malnutrition. These are the figures of the World Food Programme. So we have a clear duty as society in general to work on that. I would say that's on all our shoulders, right? And that means that in those countries where the seed industry is up and running and producing that abundance, we should try at least to create enough food for all those people who don't have enough food. And that can be by exporting food that is produced here in the developed world. It can also mean, of course, that we are improving the environment for the seed industry in the developing countries. And that's where ISF is active through the World Seed Project. We're trying to set up the enabling environment for the seed industry to grow in developing countries, and we've chosen for now 2 African countries as pilot countries, and the first very promising results are coming in right now. Climate change is going to be a major game changer of the world as we know it. All the models, and there are many different models on climate change out there, are showing us that we will see more precipitation in certain areas and less precipitation in other areas. So we're going to need drought tolerance varieties. We will also see higher temperatures in certain areas and lower temperatures in other areas. So we're going to need heat tolerant and cold tolerant crops, different from what we have now. A higher humidity through the higher precipitation will lead to a higher disease pressure. Especially fungi grow better when it's humid. So we're going to need more disease-resistant crops. And with the rising sea levels, and I just read an article about New York battling the sea comes at its gates, the rising sea levels will cause more floods. And that means we need to work on crops that have flood tolerance, that can stand being underwater for 2-3 days, and then the water recedes and the crop is still alive. So with all these challenges out there and the changes of agriculture that we can expect, we need that genetic factor, we need that genetic improvement. It's easy to imagine that you can only put so much fertilizer on an acre or a hectare, and you can only put so much crop protection products. There's an optimum to both. After that, if you put more, it becomes toxic to the plants, right? So we need the progress from the genetic improvements. It's very obvious. And in the past, when all the other agricultural inputs were not at the optimum level, around 50% of the yield progress and other progress came from the genetic improvement. However, recent studies are indicating that since the 80s of the last century, around 90% of the yield increases were caused by genetic improvement. Yeah. So there was for certain crops, of course, and we will see more of that. It's easy to realize that plant breeding is going to be the major, crucial contributor to mitigating the challenges that we're faced with through climate change. Small companies are faced with several challenges to survive around the big bucks, the big guys, right? And one strategy that you could follow is to look for the niche markets. And that can be in a different crop than what the big guys are working on. It can also be in the same crop that the big guys are working on, and try to find a type within that crop that the big guys are not, or very poorly working on. So try to look for that niche market. And from experience, I know that big multinational companies, they don't like that much complexity. They don't like to deal with 50, 60 different crop species. They can handle, on a maximum, let's say 20 different crop species, and that's it. They're divesting the other crops or not working on those, and that means there's lots of possibility for the small and medium-sized companies to jump into those crops, and there are still hundreds of crops available, to start breeding in those crops. And then once you're in such a niche market, you're going to need one or more tools, right? To modern plant breeding technology tools, you're going to need traits that are very necessary for your crop to advance. For example, a drought tolerance gene in a Brussels sprout or in lima beans, or you name it. And there you could again look at the owners of the technology, ask for a license, and because you're working in a niche crop, that license fee is probably going to be a whole lot lower than if you would use it for one of the big crops, the cash crops. The third challenge that small companies are being faced with is that they often don't have the deep pockets to do all those tests, the disease resistance test, to do all the molecular analysis that the big guys are doing. So there you could certainly look into the possibility of pooling resources, and we're seeing some very nice examples of that, where smaller companies are joining forces and they're putting their money together and build a disease resistance testing lab and they're all sending their seed lots there and their new varieties to be tested for those disease tests. Similar examples for biotechnology. You can pool your resources and still survive in that way. But of course, it requires those companies to be adaptable, to welcome change. If you're not welcoming change, I think you're going to be out of business very soon. And it also means in the times of very fast technological changes and globalization, you're going to need to work together. You cannot exclude the possibility. You need to be open for cooperation. And of course, one of the largest and most international platforms where you can meet other seed companies is, of course, the ESA World Seed Congress. The next Congress will take place in Athens, Greece, 27th to 29th of May, and I invite all Seed World readers to come to the Congress and enjoy all the benefits there.